Okay, we're back. You can see that I did pretty good, but I did go ahead and get a different marker. Okay, so I'm going to move on to question 2. Question 2 deals with judicial philosophies, and we have a couple of different types of judicial philosophies. The first one I'm going to talk about is judicial restraint. Judicial restraint. Think of a seatbelt that holds you back in a car, even though there's a force. Let's say you stop abruptly, and that force is still pushing your body forward, but the seatbelt restrains you. Think about that when you think of judicial restraint, meaning that a judge is sitting on that bench or sitting on that dais, and there may be some personal beliefs or personal ideologies that that judge may have as a human, or there may be some factors in that judge's life, or there may be some people speaking into the judge's ears or trying to persuade a judge, or whatever forces there are that are trying to push a judge to think and believe a certain way. But that judge refrains from letting that personal feeling or human characteristic play into the decision-making process. So they call that restraint. Oftentimes we look at these judges as maybe constitutionalist. We might call them, you might know somebody that really says, well, the Constitution says what the Constitution says. And constitutionalist. Okay, and that means that they are going to go to the letter by what the Constitution says. There's no wiggle room, no room for any kind of real interpretation, which is hard. That's hard for anybody to do that, but there are many who feel that way, and maybe you feel that way on particular issues, but not other issues. And maybe they feel that way on particular issues and not other issues. But in particular decisions, you might see a judge practice self-restraint. And also they might look at the Constitution from its original intent. We see that mentioned at times. Original intent. Now, another form of judicial philosophy is judicial activism. Okay, judicial activism. This is when we see a judge might adopt a philosophy that the Constitution needs to be measured against more contemporary times. Okay, so this is where you might see the argument about the Second Amendment compared to then and now, or the Fourth Amendment then and now. There was no internet, there was no drones flying around that might invade privacy, and so on and so forth. Or if you're looking at the Fourth Amendment and privacy, maybe we didn't have cell phones and terrorism and those connections then like we do now, so you might could argue about that. The privacy of protecting your information on your cell phone versus searching and looking for terrorist activity. Where do we find that balance? But judicial activism is something where the judge is going to be using more in contemporary issues in making judgments. Okay. I don't like to say modern because we look at the modern and modern era more around the 1900s, which for many of us is not so modern anymore or not so contemporary anymore. So I like to use the word contemporary because that anytime you use the word contemporary, that is the present. Okay. All right. Judicial activism, using contemporary times and decision making. And a lot of times we look at Judicial activism is relating to more liberal, we call them more liberal judges, but this can be seen with some conservative judges. If you think about maybe protecting gun rights or dealing with abortion laws, those kinds of things. Another thing that we see people who are critical about judicial activism is they might refer to judicial activist judges as legislating from the bench, meaning that the judicial branch is not supposed to be the branch that makes laws, and so they're supposed to interpret them, make sure they're constitutional. So some people think that, well, by the way they're interpreting the law, they're changing the law, and therefore they're legislating from the bench, and they don't like that. Let me see if I kind of got this. And you need to look for a court case. You need to come up with your own court case. I'm not going to sit here and give you a bunch of examples because you need to work on that for yourself. Be sure and look at the page numbers that are in that document that I've given you guys, and provide that example that you need. Okay. Alright, I'm going to erase this. I'm going to move on to the next one. And I jumped all the way over to chapter 14, and then we'll come back to chapter 11, but I'm going to try to keep it in order as how it's going to appear on the test. Okay, this is number 3, and this is going to be from chapter 14.